Welcome to episode 29 of Lucretius Today. I'm your host Cassius, and together with my panelists from the EpicureanFriends.com forum, we'll walk you through the 6 books of Lucretius's poem and discuss how Epicurean philosophy can apply to you today. Be aware that none of us are professional philosophers, and everyone here is a self-taught Epicurean. We encourage you to study Epicurus for yourself, and we suggest the best place to start is the book Epicurus and His Philosophy by Canadian professor Norman DeWitt. Now let's join the discussion with Charles reading today's text.
"'Tis proper likewise that in this place you fix it as an established truth, and impress it deeply upon your mind, that there is no being to be found in nature that consists altogether of principles of one kind, nor is there anything that is not made up of mingled seeds, and the more powers and faculties any being is endued with, the more it appears to be formed of various sorts of seeds that differ in figure among themselves. And first, the earth contains within herself first principles, from whence the fountains, flowing with their streams, do constantly supply the mighty sea. She holds likewise within her womb the seeds of fire. We see in many places how she burns, how Etna rages with distinguished flames. She likewise has the seeds from whence she forms sweet fruits, and pleasant trees for men, from whence she does afford the tender shrubs and verdant grass to savage beasts that wander on the hills. Therefore, this earth alone is called Great Mother of the Gods, parent of beasts and of the human race. Of her the learned Grecian bards of old have feigned that in her chariot she rides aloft, she drives a pair of lions harnessed, to teach that in the spacious air hangs the vast mass of earth, without a lower earth to prop it up. These beasts they yoked to show that youth, although by nature wild, yet, softened by the parent's tender care, grows tame. Her head they compass with a mural crown, because, in places strongly fortified, she bears up cities, and in this pomp adored, the image of the Sacred Mother is borne with dread solemnity throughout the world. Her, after the ancient use of holy rites, the different nations call Mother of Mount Ida, and give her for attendants a train of Phrygian dames, because in Phrygia corn was first raised, and thence was scattered over all the earth. They serve her by eunuch priests, to show that those who violate the sacred character of their mother, or are found undutiful to their parents from whence they sprung, should be thought unworthy to raise a living offspring to succeed them. With their hands they beat loudly upon the drums well braced, the hollow cymbals all about, and horns with their hoarse noise threaten dreadfully around her. The pipes, with Phrygian airs, mads their very souls, and they carry arms, the signs of their distracted rage, to terrify the stubborn minds and impious hearts of the vulgar, with the fear and reverence of this great deity. When, therefore, she is carried in procession through the great towns, and, as dumb as she is, silently bestows health upon her votaries, they scatter brass and silver in all the way she passes, enriching her with profuse oblations. They shower down the flowers of roses, and so cover the Great Mother, and the whole train of her attendants. Her, an armed troop, the Greeks call them the Phrygian Curetes, leap about with a chain through their hands, and wanton in the blood they have drawn, dance to exact time, and, full of the goddess, shake their dreadful crests upon their heads. They represent the Dictaean Curetes, who are said formerly to have drowned the infant cries of Jupiter in Crete, when the young priests, all armed, struck their brazen bucklers together, as they danced nimbly round the boy, lest Saturn should seize upon him and devour him, and, by that means, wounds his mother to the heart, with a grief never to be forgotten. For this reason, an armed train accompanied the Great Mother, or else the goddess signifies that they should preserve their native country by their arms and valor, and be a protection and honor to their parents. Such fancies, though well and wittily contrived, yet are far removed from truth and right reason, for the whole nature of the gods must spend in immortality and softest peace, removed from our affairs, and separated by distance infinite, from sorrow free, secure from danger, in its own happiness sufficient, and naught of ours can want, is neither pleased with good, nor vexed with ill. The earth is indeed at all times void of real sense, but it contains within itself the first seeds of many things. It produces them into being after various manners. So, if anyone here resolves to call the sea by the name of Neptune, and corn by the title of Ceres, and chooses rather to abuse the name of Bacchus than to speak the proper appellation of wine, such a one, we allow, may style this globe of earth the mother of the gods, when she really is no such thing.
Okay, thanks for reading that, Charles. This one's got a lot of poetry and analogy in it that's not very familiar to us today.
Hmm. That was a weird section.
Yes. Let me read what Monroe says for his summary for these sections. He basically summarizes it by saying, this you must carefully bear in mind. The more powers and properties that anything possesses, the greater variety of elements it contains. Thus the earth has elements out of which the seas and fountains and fires, out of which crops and trees, rivers and pastures are supplied. It is therefore called mother of gods, men, and beasts alike. And then he gives more description of what they're talking about with the Curites, and I guess I could read that quickly. He says, her meaning the earth, the old Greeks have personified as the great mother. She rides in a chariot drawn by lions, wears a mural crown, has Phrygian attendants, is accompanied with noisy music, receives on all hands alms. Her followers represent the Curites, who saved the young Jupiter from his father. All of which things are an allegory with some moral significance, but beautiful as they are mere fancies. The blessed and immortal gods trouble themselves not about men. As you call the sea Neptune and the like, call the earth mother of the gods if you please, but remember at the same time that it is senseless matter only containing the elements of many things. That's the way Monroe summarizes that section. I don't know that any of that is particularly controversial from an Epicurean point of view.
No.
I guess there's sort of a physics assertion here that the more complicated a thing is, the more different elements it is probably made from.
Mm-hmm.
I think that seems to be an assertion there. Martin, you ever thought about that?
Yes, I think I agree with this one. It's rather simplistic that something which is rather complex then needs to have be made up of many more elements. So this is something what we do not really find needs to be like that.
But like you say, it's sort of simplistic and probably on its face makes sense to a lot of people. I would think most of what he's stressing here is this much longer discussion of the earth as the mother of everything as being figurative rather than it's literally true, I suppose, to the extent that it contains the elements out of which everything that we deal with come from. But it's obviously not literally true in the sense of being a supernatural mother. Maybe one thing that is worth talking about that I don't think I picked up until Charles was reading it today is this where they're talking about the analogy between the earth bringing up its children and softening them by tender care over time and they grow tame. And then Martin was raising before we started the discussion today the issue of being worthy or unworthy of having children or not. So they're apparently using the analogy that the earth is an example of a good mother who raises her children tenderly and sort of civilizes them. And that was something, at least to the Greeks, was an analogy that sounds like humans were supposed to follow. Charles, am I reading that right from what you're thinking he's talking about?
There is, yeah, I can see part of that. I was looking more into the comparison between the care and how immediately after that, Lucretius says that she bears up cities.
Yeah, bears up cities as well. So that's kind of the same analogy. And you know, throughout some of the Epicurean texts, it seems like there's references to children and raising children and being proud of your children. I remember specifically at the beginning of Lucretius Book 6, he talks about how parents were proud of their children. And I think there's a text or so, maybe in the Vatican sayings, about dealing with unruly children. It seems to have been more of an issue for them to think about than I would have expected. And maybe that's what's being referenced here as well.
Yeah, it's not the first time it's shown up either. And I can't remember the exact section or if even we've gotten there yet. I seem to recall a part about the sea itself sort of sprouting out.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a very common theme. But we should also remember that after this whole paragraph, and actually the next one too, that Lucretius is quick to denounce mythology like this.
Yeah. You know, that reminds me, we've had some discussions within the last couple of days about how much we should or should not view Epicurean philosophy as a cult, and whether the Epicureans were overboard in reverencing Epicurus's personal role in the philosophy. And I see this as just one of many, many, many examples that The Epicureans were very clear that you don't cross the line into supernatural. It's okay, and I don't know whether they would have considered it fun or amusing. In some ways, it probably is something that they found emotionally satisfying. When they say Epicurus was a god, that's clearly not intended to be taken literally.
Yeah, like all of the cults of worship surrounding people that existed around that time. Like Bacchus, for example, was turned into a cult-like figure.
Right.
And Lucretius mentions that in the last paragraph, and, abused the name of Bacchus because he went from the lover of Alexander to, like, part of the Roman pantheon in the future.
Right. It would be really just ridiculous to take the position that the Epicureans, who were so very clear that the earth itself was not a god, would turn around and take the position that Epicurus was a god. It's obviously a tongue-in-cheek or, a useful analogy, just like they're saying here. It can be a useful analogy to consider the earth to be the mother of everything, as long as you don't cross the line and stain. And I'm going to look at the Monroe and Bailey versions for just a second. Monroe finishes by saying, "Let us allow him to declare that the earth is mother of the gods, if he only forbear in earnest to stain his mind with foul religion." And Bailey says, "Let us grant that he may proclaim that the world is the mother of the gods, if only in truth he forbear to stain his mind with shameful religious awe." So pretty strongly worded warning not to cross the line.
A few days, or actually about a week ago, that very same issue about Epicurus and cult-like stuff was brought up. I'm assuming this was because of the 20th, and it was just very briefly talked about on the Epicurean Discord. I don't think anyone can really deny that there was a ton of hero worship surrounding Epicurus, but like you said, it's very important that none of it ever becomes supernatural.
Right. Charles, I think I know what you're talking about. I remember commenting myself on an article that came out on the 20th talking about a passage from Philodemus, I think, which talked about, there's a phrase in at least one of the translations called covenant of the sacred festival table. And maybe that was not the source of the comment that you saw, but in Philodemus's own piety, as translated by, I think, a guy named Dirk Oberk or something like that, there's a lot of very fragmentary material in there. I'm very cautious about trying to read an awful lot into it, because I think it would be wrong to say that the 20th celebration was any kind of a pseudo-religious ceremony, or that Epicurus was held in any kind of religious esteem. But I don't even know whether hero worship is exactly the right term. But clearly, Epicurus said that reverencing the wise man is good for the one who does the reverencing and so forth. So there's always a strain in Epicurean philosophy where it's not the Socratic method where we expect everybody to reason through every question on their own. The Epicurean method is to set the conclusions out there and explain them in detail and explain why they're accurate. But you don't hide the ball. There's the article out there, The Epicurean Criticism of Socrates, which is on the JSTOR system. And I believe that's in Plutarch is where that material comes from. But the Epicureans criticized Socrates because he was renowned for asking questions instead of giving answers. But the point that is constantly a theme is that they valued a wise man's leadership and pointing them in the right direction, and presumably, arguably, saving them the time and saving them wasted effort that they would otherwise run into.
Or even incorrect conclusions, like how Socrates was very disappointed in Aristippus, for example.
I mean, there's clearly a tension that you want people to understand it for themselves, and one way to have them understand it for themselves is to lead them through the reasoning process. But there's clearly different variations in people's abilities to reason through things, whether it's age or any other factor. And I think the Epicureans decided they'd rather err on the side of getting the person to the right conclusion sooner, rather than let them flounder and potentially drown if they don't, for some reason, themselves have the ability to reason their way through it. And so I guess here is an example in this passage of the Epicureans taking the position that Earth itself, as the mother of everything, actually performs sort of the same functioning by taming and softening by the kind offices of parents. And I guess if you dug deep into this analogy of what's going on between Jupiter and Saturn, that there's some child of the gods who was exposed and was protected from harm, and that's why I guess this is saying that's why the ceremony includes armed men around the figure of the Earth Mother. I think I've seen commentators make the point that I think DeWitt makes that is it the Vatican saying about love goes dancing around the earth, calling everyone to the recognition of happiness or something like that.
I think that's Vatican saying like 52 or 51.
And that would be potentially something that might have been in Epicurus's mind when writing that, the story here of the soldiers dancing around the earth.
I've never heard that story before, but granted, there's so much of mythology that's just never been recorded, and of course it's not a huge subject of special interest to me.
Mm-hmm, right.
I think everyone's heard of Kronos eating his kids, though.
Well, maybe we spend most of the rest of the time discussing what's in the last paragraph, which is sort of a summary of some important parts of the Epicurean theology, where it says the nature of the gods must ever in itself of necessity enjoy immortality together with supreme repose. In Daniel Brown, it says, for the whole nature of the gods must spend an immortality in softest peace, removed from our affairs and separated by distance infinite, from sorrow free, secure from danger, and its own happiness sufficient. And nothing of ours can want, is neither pleased with good nor vexed with ill. That's pretty close to the material that's contained in the letter to Benesius, and also the first principle doctrine. And he, I guess, considers that to be truth and right reason, at least according to the Daniel Brown translation.
I wonder what Lucretius, or I should say Daniel Brown, means by pleased with good.
Is neither pleased with...
Monroe says moved by favors.
Well, now, isn't that exactly what's in Principle Doctrine 1, right?
And Bailey says it is not won by virtuous service, nor touched by wrath.
Okay, well, that's Principle Doctrine 1 says exactly that, pretty much. The blessed and immortal nature knows no trouble itself, nor causes trouble to any other, so that it is never constrained by anger or favor. I would think that's the point they're raising here about when they say constrained by anger or favor. For all such things exist only in the weak.
I really wish there was more stuff on the Epicurean theology or nature of the gods. It's so just wildly different to almost every imagination or depiction of a supernatural being or deity.
Right. But those points that he's raising there seem to be so similar to what's in Principle Doctrine 1 that they must have considered these particular points to be head and shoulders above the rest of the detail.
Yeah, that's mentioned time and time again throughout every limited source we can come across. Because Cicero's On the Nature of Gods. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, On the Nature of the Gods, yes.
Yeah, the Velleius section. That's pretty much what all those paragraphs just boil down to, is that one single point.
Right. What do we think, if anything, about the position that he's apparently taking here, that it's basically okay to speak in religious terms or use religious analogies so long as you not let your mind be polluted with real religion?
It's useful if you're teaching others, because like these myths, they're all stories, you know. It's a good way to sort of illustrate that, but it's when, like, I don't know about that, actually.
I guess the point that I'm thinking about that would be interesting to consider, at least briefly, is the issue. It sounds like the Epicureans were not radical grammarians, or this plays into the question also of the way they considered Epicurus. I mean, they weren't just so literally, what's a good way to say that, Charles? They weren't so literally gung-ho. They weren't so rigorous that they told you, do not ever refer to someone as a god. I mean, they were willing, obviously, to play with the words and use them and deal with people who had a different context.
And there's so much like quotations and points about how following these principles you'll rival the gods in their happiness.
Right.
And it's clearly intentional. I was going to say earlier that so much of mythology and just like religious stories rely on a ton of exposition that seems very arbitrary or fanciful. And that kind of goes against a lot of the philosophy.
Well, since the philosophy is based on pleasure, and pleasure involves having fun, there's also the element of being amused by things and being, again, not so rigorously harsh and controlling in the use of words that you just ban all illusions that might be considered to be fun. I don't know whether fun is exactly the right word or not, but it appears that they would joke with each other back and forth. And just like we today would probably, even those who are the most militant atheists out there, they understand that there's a frame of reference that people talk in, a common background of thought.
What do you think, Martin?
That was going to be my question, Martin. Sometimes people in the United States will say that Germans are very serious people. They have a different sense of humor and so forth than Americans do. So from your perspective, being European, is there a different attitude, you think, towards when it's okay to talk about religious analogies and when it's not? Is it something that ought to just be eliminated from philosophical discussion?
No, should not, because at least in the past, there are a whole line of German philosophers who were not atheists and rather tried to justify the ethics of Christianism independently as a form of humanism. So that's why I don't see that there's that much adversity towards relating to religion. Also, it's only rather recent that I would say the majority of Germans have turned away from religion. And most of this has nothing to do with belief or not. It has more that people are upset of paying taxes to the church and of the repeating things of child abuse by priests. Or that the Vatican again made it take, depending on what happened when the previous pope was elected, so that really drove out another large percentage of Christians from the church.
I think the analogy I'm looking for, or the direction I'm going in, is, I'm not sure if any example comes to your mind, but I guess what we've really got going on here is that the Epicureans were leading a movement to disabuse people of these supernatural religious ideas. They were trying to educate, if you want to use that word, or change the minds of people and tell them that these ideas that they had in the past about the role of the gods were wrong. And where I'm going with that is that from that sort of reformist perspective, they did not take a Taliban or an Islamic type of super serious attitude towards it appears. They didn't tell everybody, don't even talk about these gods, tear down your idols. They didn't get super biblical and say these are evil for you to talk about Bacchus and Ceres. They actually considered it to be irreligious from their point of view when they talk about staining their minds with foul religion. But still they were willing to say, it's okay if you want to use that analogy, just as long as you understand what's really going on, which seems to me to be sort of a more permissive or genial, it may be a word, in discussing these things. And now when I take that back to the question I asked you, Martin, about how the Germans do it, I'm not sure that I know of any examples, really. It seems like a lot of times people go straight from disagreeing about religion to let's have a war about it. But it doesn't sound like the Epicureans were taking that approach. That's kind of the direction I'm talking about right now.
Yeah, it looks like that. For this, there are too many references to the traditional gods to see that differently.
Yeah, I can't imagine that. Like, if we think about militant atheism today, I don't think something like that ever could truly have existed as like a credible or a common or even uncommon belief back then, because religious tradition was so ingrained within Greek culture.
Charles, let me follow up with what you said there. That's kind of where I'm going. The way the modern strong atheists are, do they say it's okay to talk about Bacchus and Ceres and use religious analogies as long as you don't stain your mind with supernatural religion? Or do they say it's better for you just to forget all of that stuff? Don't even talk about those people.
Well, I've been an atheist for a very long time, but I never joined any communities because of the reputation they had.
Of what?
Just really annoying and obnoxious.
That's kind of where I'm going. That's exactly where I'm going, Charles. That's exactly where I'm going. People who are militant atheists have a very
insufferable.
Yes, overbearing, obnoxious, Taliban-like I don't know, I should slander the Taliban. I don't know exactly what they think exactly. There's a common viewpoint of it, but I don't know whether it's right or wrong. But
They're
yes.
trying to make peace.
Yeah, that's right. We should hope for Afghanistan to be resolved. So they're wonderful people right now, but they have a habit of like destroying statues and being very violent.
Thing.
Yes. I'm not sure whether this point is even worth pursuing any further, but that's what I kind of sense here in this passage, is that this is another example that the Epicureans weren't just taking a militant atheist position that the gods don't exist. They were redefining what it meant to be a god. And then at the same time, they were also taking this position that it's okay to talk in these terms as long as you understand what you're saying.
We should bear in mind that blasphemy was punished by death, so there were laws against extreme atheism.
To bring this back to a contemporary source, it was said that one of the later Chironics, one of the different factions, Theodorians, named after Theodorus the atheist, he wasn't an atheist in, I guess, a traditional sense, because everything I've read so far was that his nickname or his title given to him was more about somebody without gods. So he could have been impious rather than atheist as we typically refer to it today. And it's also said that his book on gods was of huge inspiration to Epicurus. I think somewhere too in a section within On Piety by Philodemus about how like Epicureans can pray, but it mentioned something about like people in power and obeying social customs and norms.
Well, maybe that's what really this whole section we've been discussing today comes down to, because he spent a lot of detail going into how this cult of the earth as the mother of the gods, as Monroe says, may have some moral benefit to it if you look for an analogy as to how to raise your children from what the earth does, so that maybe there is some moral benefit in certain aspects of the analogies that the religious people use. And so basically in the end, he's saying that it's okay to use that type of analogy, just as long as you keep your limit, as long as you realize that the analogy only goes so far and that they're not, in fact, supernatural.
And I think this is also where the question or the belief that Epicurus was a closet atheist comes from.
Yep. It's certainly true that people back then could be persecuted for being an atheist, just like it's not all that far from being the case today. Depending on the context you live in, you can still certainly suffer a lot, even be killed for being an atheist in certain societies and certain areas.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I think that we would see more of a hint of that here in this discussion if it were a primary motivating factor. I think he's presenting that he sees that there are some beneficial analogies to be drawn from certain stories, and that it's okay to use those stories as long as you keep them limited to their natural context. Because he certainly, in the end, they use all sorts of very strong wording against shameful religious awe and staining your mind with it. And, of course, in many other references throughout Lucretius and Epicurus, it's clear that they are against standard religion. So it's really interesting how that all plays together. All right. We'll still edit this down probably into something that's shorter than normal. But any related topics anybody want to bring up today?
No,
I can't think of any.
I asked for related topics. Maybe I should say any closing thoughts today. We didn't have Elaine with us, and so we're a little shorter than normal, but hopefully Elaine will be back next week. Any closing thoughts for today?
Martin?
No, not on this one.
Charles, any closing thoughts?
I guess if you're an atheist, I don't think you should be very pompous and loud about it to the point of annoying others.
Personally, I agree with you very much, Charles. I think that's a very off-putting approach, and it's just not very successful.
Well, I don't want to get into a huge tangent here, but like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I got into this argument with this one atheist. Keep in mind, we both are atheists. I've never spoken to that guy since, but he was talking about how if you did away with religion, then naturally everybody would follow through with following what he called reason and logic. And I said that was a completely unrealistic claim. And, it's not that fanciful. Like you get rid of something like that, it creates a void you have to fill this vacuum with. and naturally people aren't going to arrive at that conclusion. So my position was just sort of critiquing the very militant approach of like a much more tame version, I guess, of destroying the statues and books.
Yeah, Charles, what I hear you saying is something that I have always thought about, the atheist movement, or what I would consider people who are like professional atheists. I mean, that's a very negative. It's an assertion that something is not true, but that doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't.
Yeah.
You're certainly not going to have reason flood in after that. You could have unreason flood in after that just as well. And it's just totally unsatisfying to me over my life to read most of the text of people who were simply attempting to attack religion without suggesting what needs to be there in its place. And that's one of the major attractions that I find in Epicurus, is that it is a complete philosophy.
It is a system.
It shows the positive, proper side of things, and as part of that, it shows you the reasons to dismiss the religious viewpoint. But the focus of Epicurus is not just simply to oppose religion for the sake of opposing religion. His focus is that he's reached a conclusion about what the nature of life is really all about, and he explains that. And so in the process, he talks about things that it's not about, but he focuses on what life is really about.
Mm-hmm. It's a very good point, and sort of that whole idea of that the very militant or professional atheism is just in opposition to another, and it doesn't offer anything in itself. Right. It doesn't propose anything.
Okay, well, with that thought, we probably are ready to close. Anything else?
Oh, I think that little tangent was my closing thought.
Okay, very good, very good. Well, we'll talk again next week and bring today for a close. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks, bye.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, bye.